Hello, friends. We're back with episode 136 of the Our Weekly Highlights podcast. Can you believe we're in September already? Well, I hope all of you in the land of the U.S. here had a relaxing Labor Day weekend, and for those around the world, having a great time as well. But thank you for tuning in from wherever you are. And this is the weekly podcast, and we showcase the latest highlights and additional finds that we see every single week, and in this particular week on the Our Weekly website itself. My name is Eric Nance, and I'm glad you joined us today. And I'm joined by my awesome co-host, who's also burning the midnight oil quite a bit regularly now, Mike Thomas. Mike, how are you doing today?
I would say wake me up when September ends, but we are not allowed to sleep in September because we are getting ready for PositConf in a couple weeks. So doing well, hanging in there, and looking forward to Chicago.
Me as well. And yes, I imagine after the workshop, I'm going to have an image in my head. If you've ever watched classic Terminator 2, when Arnold is just about set to put the end to the T-1000, whatever it's called, he says, "I need a vacation." Yeah, I think we both could use one. But, after the workshop, it'll be a fun time. So
I'm worried you might need an Uber ride drive back home.
Oh, well, yeah, I may hibernate in the hotel once or twice there. We'll see. But in any event, we're very much looking forward to the event. And but we have our weekly to talk about here. And our issue this week was curated by Colin Fay, another longtime member of the Our Weekly team, and of course, one of the architects of one of our favorite art packages called Golem, which may or may not be talked about at the workshop. But of course, he has tremendous help from our fellow Our Weekly team members and contributors like you all around the world. And what I always like to see leading off in these highlights is a situation where I find myself in trying to solve an immediate problem and then discovering a handy function that just makes my life so much easier. So it's our pleasure to welcome back to the highlights Maelle Salmon. She returns with another great blog post, very similar styles than we've heard in previous months, about some R functions that she not only learned about, but enjoyed using this week. I really like that title. First, especially as an R user on Linux, I can have an appreciation for this, is trying to find out in a quick way, what is that dependency structure of that package you want to use? What is the footprint of it? Well, a package that has been in existence for about a year now or so called Pack, which I believe has been authored by Gabor Cesardi from the Posit team. He has a handy function in Pack called package deps explain, where this is a very helpful way for you to see in a very intuitive console output if you want to see the dependencies for packages like Y, say to use this package, depends on another package that you see listed, in this case HETR2 that she sees in her example here. It will show you the connections in between the source and that other dependency that you specify. And then we see in the blog post that it ends up being the GH package that is that intermediate step between dependencies. And this has happened so much in the R community, right? We have these packages that stand on the shoulders of giants, if you will. And then those stand on the shoulders of other packages. And sometimes you want to know just kind of in a traceable way, just how big does that chain go? Sometimes it's very quick. Sometimes it might be a good 5 or 6 packages deep. You never know. But it's fascinating to see that. Next, as someone who has had to deal with gnarly data in the past, especially in the presence of weird characters, that's my description of it, that can wreak havoc as you're trying to do any kind of, say, maybe building factors off of characters or doing any kind of subsetting and figuring out why you can't get values of that particular variable. You might be the victim of ASCII characters in your data somewhere, or in that file you're importing that give that data inside. So what comes built into R is the tools package, and that has a function called show non-ASCII file, where you can quickly see where these ASCII characters are and be able to replace those if you need to with, say, a special escaping for Unicode characters and the like. But that can be a real cumbersome issue to solve as you're importing data from external sources and you're trying to figure out just where is that weird character coming from. So another handy find there as well. And then in the concept of development, maybe you weren't using something like Git right away, and you've got a couple copies of files somewhere. You know you've done this. You've done the save as, name a script, underscore final or underscore testing. You know you've done it. You know you're out there. No guilt here. I've done it too. You really want to see quickly what is that difference. You don't want to leave the confines of R to do it. You've got a couple different options here that Maelle's discovered here. One from the aforementioned tools package called rdiff with a capital R. And that is a handy way to quickly see, okay, between two files, does it differ in the number of lines? And also, what is the status of that, if you will? And then what in particular is the difference? So you get a few different slots of the output here. One is the status itself, which I believe is 1 if there's a difference. And then also this out, which shows the actual lines that are different between the source and the comparison file here. And you can see which lines are actually showing that difference. There is another package that actually is very helpful for Git operations called girt that also is able to help you actually do commits right away within R itself. And then you can see via what you might be experienced with Git itself, there's a way to do a diff between two files and see between the modified version of a file and say the existing committed version and quickly see the differences there. So girt gives you a way to kind of experiment with that, in her case of a temp directory, to do that on the fly. So I think these will be very helpful from a development standpoint, especially just getting your feet wet with Git itself. And then also, like I said, maybe you weren't as disciplined in the early days of your R development, and you're just not quite sure in that 1,000-line R code file you scripted up, just where is that 1 or 2 set of differences. There are other tools that can help with this too, but if you want to play in the R space, these are some handy functions to work with that. So really great finds as always by Maelle, and I think I'm going to be adopting some of those quite routinely in my workflows.
Well, I like this series of blog posts from Maelle where she's pointing out a couple of different functions each week, 2 or 3, or maybe 4 in this case, that she found useful, because inevitably they're always functions that I find really useful as well. And most of the time I'm learning about these functions through her blog posts. I know the package for package maintenance, no pun intended there, is really phenomenal for managing your package installations and updating packages, and handling all things package installation. And I did not know that there is a package dependencies explain function, which is just phenomenal, because when we are working in open source, a lot of times we're standing on the shoulders of other packages that have been built, and when we are trying to release an R package, our packages have dependencies that then have dependencies underneath them. And it's important because we know inevitably that folks will have installation issues, right, based upon how their setup is configured, whether or not they're using the renv package, things like that, what their environment looks like, that they'll inevitably run into some issues with dependencies. And I think this function is a phenomenal way to troubleshoot it. I've ran into plenty of dependency issues myself, and had to go down rabbit holes to troubleshoot those issues. So I think that this is going to be a really useful function for me to use going forward to do that. So a great find by Maelle. I haven't, I guess, ran into a lot of non-ASCII, or you call it ASCII characters, ASCII character issues in the past. I think here or there, right, with strange file types and things like that. If you just have sort of flat text files that you're ingesting that have weird line breaks and things like that, then absolutely. But it's nice to know that we have this base function just from tools that will show us the non-ASCII characters within that file. Just super useful. A nice function that I would have never guessed, I guess, would have been packaged into sort of the base R installation in the tools package. It's just one of those nice little utilities that we have in case we need it. And then finally, this other function from tools called rdiff, and its complement that Maelle found from the Gert package called git diff patch, I think is really useful too. And to me, it can be even useful when you are using a Git client. And I'll explain a use case that we have recently. So we're building a large data pipeline in the cloud. We're transitioning it from an on-premise source to a cloud-based source for one of our clients who have many customers. And most of these customers, the ETL scripts that we're writing for them are very similar, save for a couple different sections from customer to customer, that there are, small little edge cases that have to be handled. And when you're using, even if you are using Git, when you sort of copy these ETL templates from customer to customer, depending on how you commit, the changes that you're making from customer to customer may not be like perfectly obvious if you're committing too late, essentially, but you still want to be able to compare the ETL script from one customer to another, even though it's not like perfectly articulated in your Git commit history. And just to be able to compare two files to each other and see the differences, the small differences that exist. I think these functions are going to be super handy for me to do that, because that's a use case that, again, I'm running into that, again, it seems to be getting solved by the R Weekly highlights. So I really appreciate these nice digestible blog posts that Maelle puts together. And I always find something of value in these posts.
Yeah, well said. It's always a little nugget here and there, but you asked about those ASCII characters. Yeah, at the day job, sometimes we would get these lab data sets, and some of these instruments would just put the most gnarly characters in either unit columns or other descriptive category columns, and it was just a pain in the rear to figure out, wait, no, I subset it for that unit type. I typed it on my keyboard. Why is it not matching? One of these can trip it up to no end. So, when you deal with it, having a way to find those quickly is it just makes your life so much better. So, lots of things that Maelle posts here makes my life so much better. So, thank you, Maelle, for continuing to share your aha moments. And boy, I've had a few aha moments myself. I just haven't had time to blog about it. Some of the workshop development, some things I've been learning on that. But again, some people will hear about that in a couple of weeks. And speaking of aha moments, when I first started using R, there are definitely opportunities where you may not know it, but you are entering a world where you kind of put yourself behind the eight ball, insert your cliche here about some mishaps that can happen just by innocently trying to, for example, make a vector bigger, where you don't know how big it's going to be. Well, our next highlight is an exploration on one of these definitely most well-known potential pitfalls you can encounter with R, especially how it deals with object and memory size, and maybe some modern approaches to just how invasive this problem still actually is. And our next highlight comes from Mike Mahoney, who is a PhD candidate at SUNY ESF, about his take on one of the classic pitfalls that we've heard about for many years that has been documented in the often cited R Inferno that was authored by Patrick Burns, which, if nothing else, is a very entertaining read about some of the pitfalls you can encounter when using R on a day-to-day basis. And there is a section called Growing Objects, where maybe you are doing some data or functional programming development, and you want to basically have a placeholder object to put things in, typically a vector, and then this function is going to do things, and then you're just going to keep appending to this empty vector one by one by one. Well, Patrick Burns shows that that is going to cause a lot of havoc with memory and possibly CPU time. So the advice has always been to pre-allocate this vector with a size that you already know is going to be as big as. So if you know up front you're going to do a vector of, say, 200 elements, you create this vector, the type of it, and then how big it is, and then start putting things into that one by one, or however your function is producing it. And that will help quite a bit. And then even better, if you can do a vectorized version instead of a for loop, that can help as well. Although for loops do get a bad rap, sometimes unfairly, but to the point, that can take advantage of vectorized operations because they're actually doing for loops under the hood anyway, but in the maybe a C or Fortran library or whatever. Now, Patrick Byrne's advice comes from the inferno, comes way back in 2011. Yeah, we're about 12 years removed from that, and sometimes things can change. Certainly, the performance of R has changed. Of course, we could also talk about the, now 20,000 plus packages on CRAN that can help you beef up performance and help you interface with other libraries like C++ or whatnot. But maybe R itself has made some improvements to kind of at least get a little bit better handle on, as you're in this case growing objects, can we get away with a little bit more than we used to? So instead of just having hypothetical what ifs, Mike does this awesome exercise here in the blog post of using the bench package, in particular the mark function, to prototype 4 different ways of growing a vector of unknown size, starting with the classical, just the vector empty itself, and then using either single or double brackets. Apparently that does make a difference. Well, the results do show that, as expected, you can get a lot more mileage out of the bracket growing methodology here, way more than just the typical C of empty vector route. So he does some additional explorations with, say, the vapply function, but that's still slower than some of the other allocation methods. But these differences are not to the extent they may have been back in 2011. So there's always like a practical trade-off of just how much performance you need to eke out. Sometimes it definitely matters, especially if you're doing, say, massive simulations and you need that performance as much as you can get. And other times you might be able to get away with a little bit. So he's got some visuals at the end of the post kind of showing as your sample size or the length of the vector increases, kind of the computation time and memory footprint. And you can clearly see the differences between these approaches. Pre-allocation is still the clear winner here. I think that's one of the takeaways. But apparently there have been some interesting comments from the community in the blog post that is at the end here. We'll have a link to a couple of these responses. I believe Jun Cho found some commits back in the R core itself to help with some of these issues with pre-allocating and memory footprint, and some safeguards that they put in that space. So definitely check those out if you're interested in the performance gains and how R itself is being enhanced in this space. But in the end, yes, the takeaway is still, in my opinion, pre-allocate when you can, but you may not be in quite a world of hurt like you were before, back in 10 years ago or so when you didn't do such methods. But again, the approach that Mike takes here, I think, is quite intuitive here. As if you have a question about different approaches, benchmark it. See for yourself. It's great advice to live by, for sure. So, Mike, are you a pre-allocator, or do you like to wing it with empty stuff?
I try to unallocate, I guess, most of the time as opposed to pre-allocate. But, this is my consultant answer. It all depends on your use case, right? How big the data is that you're working with. It sort of determines how much you need to fuss with these things or how much you necessarily need to care. I thought it was pretty interesting how, unallocation, which is essentially, not predefining how big the vector is going to be, just letting it fill up via one bracket versus two brackets is so different. And we're talking about square brackets now. So it's almost double in terms of memory and time between two brackets and one bracket. So one bracket is half the time to essentially fill that vector as opposed to two brackets. And the same goes for memory. Two brackets uses double the amount of memory that one bracket uses. And the code is exactly the same. except for a second square bracket on either side of that sort of assignment to the object, which is really, really interesting. But I think the main takeaway, right, at the end of the day, is that pre-allocation, unallocation, all these vectorized approaches via apply are all way, way, way faster than just using the C function to slowly sort of fill that particular vector. So I think, if you want to be safe and not have to spend too much time futzing with which one of these approaches you're going to use, just don't use the C function and either pre-allocate or unallocate using square brackets or otherwise, or the vapply function. So I really appreciate that Mike took the time to benchmark all these different approaches against each other. This is absolutely something that I've run into before. Some of these for loops, you're exactly right, sort of have a code smell to them and remind me a lot of my early days of writing R code that I've tried to get away from. And, we're grateful to have tools like per these days as well, where we can just apply functions across vectors or lists in a much more simplistic syntax than having to write for loops and otherwise. So really nice blog post by Mike. I appreciate him pulling in, June Cho's comments from Mastodon at the bottom, which have references like directly to the R source code, which is pretty incredible, and commits along the lines of that, as well as some comments referencing some videos that Josiah Perry has about loops as well, which I think deal again with a lot of these concepts of memory allocation and speed and performance. It's really interesting post if you're somebody who's looking to optimize the code that you write, specifically when it comes to vectors. I think this one's for you.
Well, Mike, you and I are, of course, in this time of year, wherever it's for your consulting business or me through my big org, day job duties. We're at this time where we're planning for next year, key projects that are going to be either funded or taken upon by our respective groups. Well, guess what? This happens in the R community too, because we're on our third highlight here. We have a call to action, and it is the applications for new grants from the R Consortium for new infrastructure projects is up and running. And for those that aren't aware, we've actually been talking about R Consortium for a bit on previous episodes, but this is a golden opportunity to, if you have an idea to help make R better, and in this case, especially from an infrastructure side of things, you can send a proposal to the Infrastructure Steering Committee. And you may be wondering, that seems really ambitious. What has been successful in this space before? One is the R Hub, which is a very valuable service for you to mimic a lot of CRAN checks on additional servers through an API invocation through the R Hub package itself, but also you can quickly determine how your package is going to perform in those CRAN checks and have it build on many architectures before you actually submit it to CRAN itself. That has been helpful to so many people. And in fact, even circling back to Shiny like we always do, one of the nice things about Golem is that they have in one of their development scripts a little placeholder to check your package on R Hub if you want. So it's really used quite a bit across many spectrums of our development. And then also, if you've been interacting with databases, I know many of you in the audience have, especially with the voluminous amounts of data we have in our projects these days, the DBI initiative, which in essence is a package that helps bring this unified, DSL, if you will, to other specific packages for interfacing R with databases. They had an R Consortium grant years ago to help beef up DBI even further with robust testing and other infrastructure improvements. So DBI has been a huge benefit of what the R Consortium has offered for these grants. And then there's also not just a technical side, there's also social or community-driven infrastructure improvements as well, such as what has gotten very popular in the last few years, the Saturdays conference system, where you can just have one day everybody gets together and share their presentations or their knowledge about R. That organization has been launched by a grant that was submitted years ago, and that's had great success. Well, I know I started in South Africa, I believe, years ago with one of them, and then it's taken off in different regions since. So it doesn't just have to be technical, it can be social as well. So the blog post has that in more detail, as well as the key dates. It looks like the cycle for this, the application deadline is October 1st. So you've got the rest of September to get your proposal out there. So yeah, if you have a great idea, it's a great time to get involved.
Yeah, I really appreciate the undertakings from the ARC Consortium and the ISC to do these things, right? It really, I've talked about it many times before, but it really provides that maybe additional incentive or additional help in terms of funding for folks who want to enrich a small section of the R ecosystem that's going to help a lot of other people. So it's amazing that we have projects like this. I don't know how much of this sort of exists within Python or Julia or things like that. I guess I'm just not familiar enough with those communities, but this seems like a pretty special thing within the R community. And it's funny, they have sort of a call to action that says, do you see emerging domains where R could significantly impact them? And, is it climate science, engineering, finance, medicine? And I'm like, all of the above. You know what I mean? And I guess that's a benefit that I have operating a consulting firm is that I actually get to see R being used across all of these different disciplines. And it's really phenomenal to see just how impactful it can be and how widespread and broad its applicability is. So, I think it goes without saying, that some of the projects that have been funded by this particular effort, including DBI and SF and things like that, are hugely impactful on a giant community of folks, but I wouldn't let that scare anyone away from applying for this funding. They are interested in projects that have a low to medium risk and a low to medium reward. They're not necessarily looking for moonshots, high risk, high reward projects. They're looking for things that have a very focused scope. So I think there's probably a lot of people out there maintaining R packages or have a great idea for an R package that may seem a little niche to the domain that you're working in, but I would encourage you to apply because you never know. Maybe your project will get picked for funding from the R Consortium and the RSC, and maybe it will have a bigger impact than you realize.
Yeah, in fact, I was even just seeing what recently was funded even as of earlier this year. And lo and behold, friend of the podcast, John Harmon, has a project that's been funded called API to R, an R package for auto-generating R API clients. Now that could be a huge game changer too. So that's a great thing to look at if you're interested in this and seeing kind of the history of what's been funded and seeing either patterns or inspiration as you get your proposals together. So yeah, you never know what you find there, but you don't have to be the head of a major corporation to get this funded, right? I mean, you can be a community member just like us, and you have that idea and you got a great proposal. I think there's a good chance of getting that funded here. So yeah, but also speaking of pursuing, there's a lot more to pursue, if you will, in this week's Our Weekly issue. Take a couple of minutes for our additional finds of the issue. And for me, I always like these kind of historical look backs, if you will. And we'll link to the blog post by Chung-Hong Chan titled 10 Years of Rio. I'm not talking about the city Rio. I'm talking about the R package Rio, where this has been, I'm not sure this is the best analogy, but like the Swiss Army knife of importing data formats, because it can import almost any format you can think of. I had no idea it's been 10 years since Rio has been around. I've seen it used time and time again across different projects and different industries. So Chung Hong's post here does a great look back to how Rio started, some of the lessons he's learned, and yes, even some, you might say, moments that he wished he could have back, so to speak, but he's been very transparent about it. And it's a fascinating read to how Rio was born. But yeah, the blog post is a great look at the history of Rio and where maybe it'll go in the future. But in the end, great great package that has helped immensely many people with their data flows into R. Mike, what did you find?
Oh, that's a great find. It's a really cool read into the history of a package developer and package maintainer too, if you're interested. The highlight that I found is some updates in the Shiny ecosystem because it's something I'm super excited about, and primarily in the BS lib package, we now have tooltips, popovers, and a new switch input widget, which is absolutely awesome. It seems to me like some of these UI improvements that they are putting into Shiny for Python are being put into BS lib. I guess instead of the maybe I'm not understanding that correctly, Eric.
Well, I think what they're positioning BS Lib as, and ironically, in a couple of weeks we'll hear from the sources on this, is things that they wish Shiny for R had that are just not at this stage of life quite ready to put in yet. BS Lib, I think, is going to be that enhancement on top of Shiny as the foundation. And plus, with BS Lib, they can move faster with trying these ideas out. So I think now that Shiny for Python has the benefit of learning from the development of Shiny for R after how many, 10, 12 years or so. There's lots of things that they know they want to build in right the first time on that side of it. So that's my take on it.
Very, very, very interesting. No, and I think you're absolutely correct there. But it's really cool. You use Shiny widgets a lot, and not to have any preference over one package or another. But to me, it feels like some of these improvements that are coming to BS Lib are things that have existed in the Shiny widgets ecosystem for a while, but they just look a little bit cleaner with these more recent implementations within BS Lib. So I'm excited to get started integrating, especially tooltips and popovers are super useful for just providing that additional context around the visuals that folks are seeing, the context around the data that they're seeing on screen, and how to interact with your Shiny app. So I'm really excited about those UI improvements. And one other one to the Shiny package itself, it now renders dynamic UI asynchronously, and will also load script tags in an asynchronous manner. So I do have quite a few apps that render a dynamic UI sort of from the get-go. That are dynamic to an underlying file, YAML file, or data set, or things like that. So I know that those take some time to boot up. So I am very excited to see if these improvements really speed up the time it takes for those apps to get started. And there's a few other updates within the ecosystem, within the future promise function of the promises package for speed improvements there, and some additional objects that are now supported by Leaflet, some additional geospatial type objects that are now supported by Leaflet. So very exciting time to be a Shiny developer always, or just an open source developer in general, right? We're always seeing new improvements come through, and this is definitely a suite of exciting improvements in the Shiny ecosystem.
Yeah, I've been so excited to see where BS Web is going. And once I knew they were building in the more friendly kind of upfront functions to get a nice clean dashboard appearance on, I made the call in my virtual desk here. And I said, that's it. My next workshop, we're training whatever it is, we're building an app with BS Lib's dashboard functions, and hence the workshop is using that too. So we are very much consumers of this, and I'm excited to hopefully, from this point forward, if I want to stick with Shiny proper, I don't feel like I'm compromising on UX anymore. That always felt like a trade-off that, again, this is the nature of it being in such long development. You just learn over time how people use packages like this. So yeah, I'm really excited. In fact, I'm revamping an older app as we speak at the day job, where we're getting a clean look at how we want to do the UX, a clean look at how we do the back end. And I said to myself, yeah, the traditional, sidebar and stuff. No, we're doing BS Web all the way now. So I'm really excited. And for those of you that use the package like Shiny BS to do those tooltips and popovers before, guess what? You don't have to anymore. BS Web's got you covered. So I know there's code out there in the wild. Some of you out there have used Shiny BS a lot for that functionality. Again, fair play to Shiny BS over the years, but that's not being maintained anymore. So, yeah, might want to move the BS lib sooner than later.
And it just looks cleaner in BS lib from everything I've seen thus far. So, super excited.
No complaints from me on the looking of it either. So, yeah, and themable too. Look at this. We're gushing all over the place on this. We could go for hours about this, but you know what we're going to leave you with is how you can get involved with the project. So, R Weekly itself, we are proud to welcome our newest curator to the team, Emily A. Robinson. She has just joined us as a couple days ago, so we'll see an issue from her hopefully very soon. But yeah, and if you want to join alongside her to be a curator for the project, you just go to rweekly.org. We've got a link to our GitHub page where we have complete details on how you can get in touch with us and see if you'd like to get involved with the curation. And also, if you see that great new blog post, maybe a retrospective, maybe a great use of R in another industry, we want to hear about it on R Weekly itself. We are just a pull request away. The upcoming issue draft is directly linked at the top corner of the page. So you can send a pull request in your fancy Markdown syntax. It's actually not that fancy. Markdown, you can write. If, as E136 told me, if you can't learn Markdown in 5 minutes, he would give you $5. Well, I never got paid by him because I learned Markdown in less than 5 minutes. Anyway, it's very easy to pick up, so head over to the GitHub repo and you can send a pull request that way. And we want to hear from you as well. In fact, I want to send a shout out to those that gave us some interesting comments on my cross-posting in the last episode on LinkedIn. Got some nice comments there about maybe some hesitation around the S7 class and some other comments there. But yeah, keep it coming. We love to hear from you. And get in touch with us on social media as well. I am mostly on Mastodon these days with @rpodcast at podcastindex.social. And yes, sometimes I'm on the other one too. I'm at the Rcast on, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, feel free to get in touch with me there. Mike, where can the listeners get a hold of you?
Likewise, Mastodon's the best place at Mike_Thomas at fostodon.org.
Awesome stuff. Well, we almost probably recorded 2 episodes of our pre-show, folks. Maybe someday that'll get released in bonus material, but not yet. We got lots of fun stuff planned for you as always. But until then, we will have another edition of our Weekly Highlights next week. And maybe some modern approaches to just how invasive this problem still actually is. So our next highlight is coming from Mike Mahoney, who is a PhD candidate. Of course, I forgot where he actually was a PhD candidate. That's it. All right. Try again. But if you see a need for R to tap into newer technology or newer ways of thinking, and also sharing ways we share our too many shares.
You better make sure you take those vitamins before PositConf.
I know.
I need you there.
Yeah, I will. I will be there somehow. I'll hook her by crook. Yeah. Okay. Growing factors. Yeah, you and me both.